I'm Harrison Fraker, and I'm chair of the Energy Resources Group. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 20th annual Energy and Resources Annual Lecture. But this year, in the interdisciplinary spirit of ERG, we are doing this together with the Center for South Asian Studies. They are our co-sponsor. And so it's been a long time putting this together, so we want to thank and acknowledge them. We really do believe in these interdisciplinary partnerships across campus, making wonderful things like this happen. So more people can keep coming in while I'm making this introduction. First of all, what I'd like to do is acknowledge the Roth family. I wonder if there are any representatives from the Roth family here. The Roth Family Fund has been instrumental in funding these annual lectures, as well as the Class of 35 Fund. So we want to thank those who've contributed to the Class of 35 Fund and also to the Roth Family Fund. It's important to also mention that both the Energy Resources Group and the Center for South Asian Studies do have fundraising efforts underway in case any of you are feeling particularly generous after the lecture. There are going to be donation cards floating around. And so please pay attention to those. Being able to fund this interdisciplinary activity on campus really does depend a lot on the generosity of our alumni and friends. A little bit of departmental news. First of all, we have just soft launched the coolest looking website for the Energy Resources Group. Thanks to our very, very clever students, and it is really incredibly interactive and really captures the spirit of the Energy Resources Group. We've also done something a little unusual. We actually are going to renovate the ERG space. It probably hasn't been touched since the 1950s. So it's pre-Mad Men. It's so bad. What's interesting about it is, you know, these things take time. You have to get in the queue. You have to get funding from the campus. But in the meantime, we've brought in all this good furniture, so our students are getting almost all the benefit of the renovated space now. So they actually have much better working conditions. We also, it's terrific this evening. I'm going to embarrass David Antoff. He's our new faculty member. Would you please stand up, David? David, he is one of these wonderful econometric numbers guy. He has really helped determine the value of carbon avoidance and given a price to it and helped the White House do this. And as he said, it took a lot of number crunching to do this. He's interested in many, many other things in typical ERG fashion, but he's certainly got that base covered. I'm not aware of any new CSAS faculty. Are there any new ones who I should be introducing or would like to stand up? I didn't get a heads up on that, but I wanted to give someone the opportunity. So before I introduce our introducer, just want you to please hold all your questions until the end when Isha will be able to try to coordinate the questions. So now to the main event, and to introduce our spectacular guest and speaker, who's already had a great visit both with ERG and with the Center for South Asian Studies. Isha Ray, who is one of our experts on water, I say experts on water and the world. So please welcome Isha to come up and introduce our speaker.
Good evening. It is my great privilege, my great pleasure, and my great honor to introduce our speaker today, Ms. Sunita Narayan. Before I launch into my paeans of praise, which will be effusive but short, I'm sure you would not like my paeans of praise to be disturbed by the pinging of your cell phones. So if you would take a moment now to make sure that they're all silenced, that will be lovely. Thank you, we appreciate it very much. It's ERG's great pleasure and CSAS's great pleasure to welcome to campus, after many years of not being here, Sunita Narayan. Sunita is the director of CSE, the Center for Science and Environment, based in New Delhi, India. CSE has been a fearless, truly fearless leader for environmental advocacy since its founding with the late Dr. Anil Agarwal. Sunita is now its director. CSE's mode of operation is research and groundwork-based environmental advocacy, and it has been remarkable in the accessibility and usefulness of its publications to scholars, governments, and practitioners worldwide. It has been remarkable in its role in awakening environmental consciousness and environmental thinking amongst people around the world, not only in India. And Sunita herself has been leading this organization. She joined it in the 1980s, and she's been leading it for many years now. And her style has very much co-evolved with CSE's style, with fearless advocacy, honest research, ability to take on anyone, be it the government, be it a polluting corporation, be it sometimes her own environmental allies. And that's not easy to do. As a result of this, Sunita has earned the respect and admiration of anyone who knows anything about environmentalism, pretty much wherever they are in the world. Sunita has been the recipient of many honors. The first I wish to mention is the Padma Shri, which is one of India's highest civilian honors. And this is no joke, because she has been a consistent thorn in the side of the Indian government. But it is a very constructive kind of thorn, which is what distinguishes CSE's mode of activism from many others. As they have been confrontational, so they have been constructive. As they have been engaged, so they have refused to be co-opted. And this is a really remarkable role model for all of us who want to be involved in environmental sustainability and all that it implies. She has been awarded in 2005 the Stockholm World Water Prize. She has 3 times been named as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Time magazine has named her one of India's 15 most influential people in current policy circles. So Sunita has been really at the forefront of environmental sustainability, water pollution, north-south equity, climate change, any environment and sustainable development issue you care to name. CSE and Sunita are out there in the front. Therefore, it is my great honor to present Sunita Narayan on behalf of ERG, CSAS, and the University of California at Berkeley to you this evening. Please join me in welcoming.
Thank you, Isha. I mean, that was really sweet. I mean, normally you have introductions read out and about the person, and this, I really felt moved by what you said. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for being here. I had promised to come last year, and I wasn't able to. And I'm really happy to be here today. Hi, Tom. Really happy to be here today and to speak to all of you. I wanted to share with you some of the ideas that we've been developing in India on how we move ahead. What do we do to, what I say, reinvent growth without pollution? And obviously, the big challenge for India is, can we actually change the trajectory of development so that we don't first pollute and then clean up? Because that's what the rest of the world does. That's what you do. And so the question is, can we do it differently? And that's the big challenge for us. And it's a challenge because it's also the imperative. And that's what I'll explain to you. It always amazes me that on one hand, science has become so much more certain about climate change. I mean, I was at the first PrepCom in 1992, 1991 in Geneva. And at that time, all of us who cared about climate change, worried about climate change, really thought about something in the future. And we were banking on scientists who, in any case, are normally so fuddy-duddy and so ifs and buts and maybes and perhaps and all the rest of it, thinking, yeah, they had something in it and that it would really get to be dangerous as things went on. And today, when I look around, when all of us look around, we know that science is that much more certain. And yet, and that amazes me, is that action has become that much more uncertain. And I think that's the paradox that we must understand, that we are not reinventing growth without pollution. That in spite of all the big talk and everything that we say, we are only tinkering with growth to make it a little more green, a little more sustainable. It's actually nothing more than greenwash if you look at the imperative of the change that we need in the world. Extreme weather events are clearly growing in terms of intensity and frequency. We are seeing that across the world. But you have to remember that from where I come from, it means a lot. The monsoons, as I keep saying, are India's true finance minister. It is not Mr. Chidambaram, who was in the chair, and it is not going to be the next finance minister, whoever the person is. It is the monsoon. And as the monsoons get to be more variable, more extreme, because that's what we are seeing. We are seeing more extreme weather events, more rain in fewer number of rainy days. And that's already being recorded. And that impacts people. It impacts livelihood. It hits people, the poor, who are most vulnerable. And so I want to say this because we must remember that we are not acting at the scale and the pace that is needed, and that the poor in the world are most badly hit by our inaction. Now, the big question that all this raises is that India does need growth. I mean, it is very clear that we have a huge challenge of servicing people who still are not reached. If you take energy, for instance, 30% of Indians, and we're over 1 billion people, still use kerosene for lighting. 700 million people use firewood for cooking. And that's a huge health burden on women, as you know, who are the ones who are most exposed to the smoke. And so the question that I think should worry, that we should think about, not worry about, but think about, is that can India do development differently? Can we provide well-being without emissions, growth without pollution? I mean, why and what would our imperatives be that we would do this differently? We know today that the current growth model is highly capital intensive. It is highly resource intensive. If you look at the crisis of the world, the crisis of the US, the fact is that such small populations, I mean, the US with such a large landmass still has such a piddly little population. Such a small population uses such disproportionate share of the resources and creates huge problems. And then you invest massive amounts in containing the adverse impacts of growth. And your entire environmental management system is to keep investing in containing the impacts of growth. That's the growth model that we are inheriting today. That's the growth model that the world is addicted to. But it's a growth model that keeps us always behind the problem, always behind the problem. If you look at India, and that's the issue that confronts us today, that's the environmental growth model that we are inheriting. The fact is that we are getting a huge environmental burden. There's a huge toxic fallout because of growth in India. Our air is toxic. Our rivers are dying because of sewage and chemicals. And we are finding that we are doing everything that the rest of the world has done, but we are not being able to catch up. So we're building all the sewage treatment plants. We're putting all the after-treatment device in our cars. We're cleaning up our fuel from sulfur. We're doing pollution control as what the rest of the world has done. And yet we are finding that the answers which supposedly worked, and I have put that in inverted, have supposedly worked in the rich world, are not working for us. And that's really the crisis that confronts environmentalists like us, because it isn't as if in India there is no concern about environment. People care about the environment. Governments are investing money into it, and yet we are just not succeeding. And that then becomes the question of why is it not working? And the reason is now more and more clear. One, that the technologies that we are adopting, which are not affordable to meet the needs of all. So we are now increasingly finding that when we are looking at the environmental management technologies, that they just are not affordable by vast numbers of people, and we don't have enough money to keep investing in cleaning up, because you keep investing and you stay behind the problem, but you have to keep investing, and we don't have that money. And as a result of it, not only are the technologies expensive, we don't have the money and the wherewithal to keep investing, and so the end result is pollution. And that's why we need new answers. So on one hand, growth is a problem. On the other hand, there is also a huge demand for a different model of development, a different kind of development. And this is coming out of the fact that we are a democracy. So there is huge protests against mining, thermal power projects, dams, pollution that are happening across the country. I call them the million pollution mutinies. People are protesting against the takeover of their land, their water, their forests, their livelihood. And the key reason they're doing this is because they're saying development must be inclusive. And so what they're asking for is that this growth model, which is so capital intensive, so resource intensive, which actually puts both adverse impacts on the environment, has a toxic fallout, but also, because of its capital intensity, creates huge inequities in society. And so there is a demand to say that create a development model which is more inclusive, where our land, when it is taken over, we also have livelihoods. And that when mineral companies come in, they don't throw us out, because today's modern industrial growth does not require people. It actually requires machines. And that's the big crisis of livelihoods that is emerging in the country. So the question that we have as environmentalists, that is this therefore the opportunity for India to reinvent? Can these limits to growth be seen as that opportunity? So on one hand, we are seeing that the current model of environmental management is not working to contain pollution. We know that today. We also know that the current model of development is not working to meet the needs of all. So governments will say there are limits, and I would say this is the opportunity. This is the space we have to think differently of what we can do. I'll give you two examples to sort of illustrate what I'm talking about and how I see these emerging. The first story comes from my own city of Delhi. In the mid-90s, when suddenly we realized what toxic fallout was all about, we could not breathe. I mean, Delhi's air was so black with smoke that we suddenly realized that we had been overtaken by polluting vehicles and our air was foul, and we needed to do something about it. But at that stage, we were 15 years behind the world in terms of emission and vehicle technology. So the question for us was, would we take the incremental route, which you have done, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, as far as emission standards are concerned, or should we find a different approach? Should we find a leapfrog approach? And we suggested a leapfrog approach to move to compressed natural gas, CNG, which would not just, so we don't take the approach of just changing fuel or improving fuel, you change the fuel itself. You change the fuel so that it's far less toxic, far less polluting. So what we did at that stage was to put out an ad. Oh, I'm one behind. No wonder you're getting so confused. Sorry. This is a Mac system. Okay. Okay, I wanted to show you this ad. So we put out this ad when we had our campaign. We said, roll down the window of your bulletproof car, Mr. Prime Minister. The security threat is not the gun, it's the air of Delhi. And we put out an agenda of reform, and we gave the Prime Minister's home phone and fax number. And we made sure it was a good number. And this was Atal Bihari Vajpayee at that time, and they were pretty flummoxed by what was happening. So early morning, I started getting calls saying, the Prime Minister's office is directing everything back to you, saying, we can't do anything, you will. So it was, but the fact is, we raised concern about air pollution. We were worried about the health impacts, and we were suggesting to government that let's find a different route. And the different route was this, was essentially saying, I normally use the European standards. You would have, in the US, you have Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 standards. But in India, because we have gone in relation to the European standards. So the pre-Euro 1 standards was without any control on sulfur in your fuel, any control. Euro 1 was as much as 2,000 parts per million, if I remember right, or 5,000 parts per million. It was big. Euro 2 was down to 500 parts. So we were essentially saying that we were at pre-Euro 1 with no controls, and we needed to be at Euro 4. And so instead of taking the incremental route of cleaning up fuel every 2 years, every 3 years, we would just change the fuel, as I said. So we moved to gas and got to Euro 4 emission standards by doing so. And as a result of it, we did get clean air. I mean, there is now more and more evidence to show that how in Delhi we changed the trajectory. So instead of going up there, we actually went to a pollution level, which didn't reduce, but it stabilized in spite of the fact that we were adding such huge numbers of vehicles. And there is enough to show that there's enough evidence to show that we actually did reduce pollution, and we did have massive health benefits because of the transition to CNG, and because we now have, in fact, the world's largest fleet on clean fuel, which is over 200,000 vehicles running on it. But the problem is, and this is where we are today, that pollution levels are going up. That Delhi is very close to losing the gains that we made because of the CNG transition, and that all evidence shows that if we don't get our act together, we are seriously going to very quickly overtake even Beijing. We did for a few days this winter, but not overall. But we will if we don't get our act together. And what is also very clear is that air pollution is because of vehicles. I mean, we've got stationary sources of pollution, you've got mobile sources of pollution. Now, on stationary sources of pollution, you can put in the treatment systems, you can put in your enforcement, you can clean up. But your mobile sources of pollution, which is vehicles, the dilemma in our part of the world is that we keep cleaning up the vehicle. We've improved our fuel technology, our emission technology, but then we add more vehicles. So as much as we clean up, we add. And the net impact of it is nothing. And so we stay behind the problem, always. But the point I want to make to you, and something that is not often said, is that that's not very different from where you are. You just think that you have moved ahead, but you haven't. If you look at UK, the results show very clearly that all other, that even as cars became much more efficient as far as emissions are concerned. People just bought more cars, people just drove more. And as a result of it, emissions continued to go up. So you did not de-link the growth of emissions from the fact that each vehicle had become that much more efficient in terms of the emissions. And if you look at how we've all grown up in the field of pollution, it's something that is always amazing to me that we don't really think about this enough. We do, but not enough. You know, when I started my work on pollution, the only pollutant I knew was SPM, which tells you how old I am. But it was suspended particulate matter. That's all we knew, that's all we cared about. And then we improved our vehicle technology, we improved our fuel technology, and as a result of it, we thought we had got clean air. But as we improved the technology, we found a new generation of problems. So scientists first said, RSPM, respirable suspended particulate matter. And then they said, no, it's not just respirable. It's so small, it's PM 2.5, that God, when he made our nose, never thought about diesel. He never thought of the fact that you would have such small particles that the hair in our nose would not be good enough to keep it out. So you improved the engines, but the mass of particles went down, so did the size. You had to invest again, and we did. You invested, Europe invested, we invested to clean up. We introduced more technologies. But mid-2000, what you found out was that the same technology that was used to basically get rid of particles would increase the heat. Higher temperatures would mean higher NOx. And NOx then leads to another pollutant called ozone, which is something that we are now very worried about because, though I must say I love ozone because, ozone is a gas which drifts, to just get a little bit of into the side, it drifts. And it moves away from a pollution source, from a high pollution source to a relatively cleaner source. And the one thing that we are very keen to do is to put ozone monitor on the Prime Minister's house. Because I'm pretty sure where the rich of India live is where the cleanest air would be, or the cleanest environment would be. So if the ozone can somehow get to them, maybe we'll get cleaner air across. But the fact is that you got a new generation of pollutant, which is NOx. And again, you investing, and Germany went through a whole exercise of denox catalysts, and all of us are sort of running around trying to denox our cars now. And all this time, you've now found out that you have black carbon, you have ozone, as I talked about. But the one thing that we've never really understood, that in spite of SPM, RSPM, NOx, ozone, that the one thing that cars contribute to big way is climate change. And so, in spite of everything we have done, we continue to create a huge global problem. And as I say, constantly, we stay behind the problem. But what are we doing? We're looking for answers in hybrid vehicles. We're never looking to reinvent the problem itself. We're never saying that let's relook at the fact that we should rethink mobility, not cars. So not just think about cleaning up the cars and getting the cars to be more efficient, but think about how you would reinvent mobility itself so that you could move people and not vehicles. And that, to me, is really the challenge of environment today, that we are not getting to what is the core of what needs to be done. We're still tinkering, as I said, with the big picture, and the scale of the transformation that is needed is urgent. Now, the question is, can India do it? Can India reinvent mobility? Will it? Why do I think there is a possibility? If you look at it today, just about 10 to 15% of India commutes by cars. In my own city, Delhi, we have the second highest per capita income in the country. Only 13% of Delhi actually commutes by car. Only 13% as of now. Yet, private cars have filled up 90% of the road space. And all flyovers, even before they are built, are filled. And you already have 26% of the city which is under roads. We have 66 flyovers. Pollution is up. Driving speed is down. And the big question for us is where is the space for 80 to 90% to drive? It's ironically the same question in climate change. So the entire atmospheric space has been filled up by the emissions of a few. And the question that the rest of the world is asking is, where is the space for us? And that's really the question in Delhi as well. You filled up your roads with a very small number of people. And it's a big question today, where is the space for the rest of the 80 to 90% to drive? Now, in the environmentalism of the poor, and I will come to this to explain to you what I mean by it, the issue would be why not reinvent mobility itself? Cars, as I said, have occupied 90% of the road space. But most importantly, and I think this is what makes us different, cars have not replaced the bus, the bicycle, or walking. They have only marginalized the bus. They have only made the pedestrian the most invisible person on the roads. But they have not replaced it. Even today, 40 to 60% of Indians use a bus, 10 to 20% cycle, 20 to 30% walk, and as I said, very few people still take the car or the two-wheeler. So the question is, and this is data for cities below 5 lakh, which is 500,000, to above. And if you look at it, the bulk of people, even in the larger cities, are in the blue band of public transport. And so the question that we are asking in India is that we walk and cycle because we are poor. How can we walk, cycle, bus because and when we are rich? And the imperative is the fact that you have no longer road space in which you could fit in the needs of the 100%. So you have to reinvent mobility because you have to provide for the rest. And so I believe if we all get our act together and if we can push and kick and scream and shout and get this idea out there, you can reinvent mobility at the scale never done before. And this way you can turn your constraints for growth as opportunity. I'll give you another example, my favorite one, because as Isha knows, and she and I share a passion of working on shit and excreta. It's a very small group of people in the world who actually really have dinner conversations on shit and excreta, but we do. The second example really is, I talked about the fact that we are struggling to deal with our rivers and our river pollution. And we are building our sewage treatment plants thinking that it'll deal with the problem. But the fact is that if we want to deal with pollution in our part of the world, we will have to reinvent our water waste management systems as well. And for that, the pollution must link to two key political economies. One, the political economy of water supply, where today, what everyone else is doing, and I spent the last day and a half with fascinating conversations trying to understand California's water supply system. And I learned of the large, long aqueducts of water that you are carrying across from north to south, west to east. But that's the way the whole world does it. So that's what we are doing as well. But the political economy of water supply is that the longer the source of bringing the water, the higher the cost of supply, higher the distribution loss, and therefore there is no money to spend on sewage control. There is no money to spend on actually supplying water equitably to everyone. There is no money to spend on taking back the water, cleaning it, and treating it. The political economy of defecation is that most cities in India have no sewage networks. We are poor. We do not have the infrastructure of underground sewage networks. So we cannot connect the sewage treatment plant to the sewage. And as a result of it, the political economy of defecation is that unless we think about this, we will continue to pollute. So we did a study, a 2-volume study a year ago, where we looked at 71 different cities of India and asked one simple question: where does your water come from? Where does your waste go? And I've become so incorrigible about this question that the one question I did ask Isha was, where does Berkeley's waste go? And I was told the Bay. So that's interesting. So I think the question really that we asked is, city by city, where does it go? And what we are finding is that most cities, in fact, all cities of India, are getting their water from further and further away. And the costs are increasing, as I said, the distribution loss is increasing. The cost of energy today is the single largest component of water supply. And as I said, most cities of India do not have drains. And no new growth cities are growing without drains. And so what we have today is an impossible situation of fixing the backlog with the front log growing even before we know it. And that really requires us to rethink what are we going to do with our water and our waste system. And the issue for us as environmentalists is that we can be very happy to say, well, the waste of some is taken, and I have an underground sewerage network in my part of the city, and that takes my waste, treats it. And so I've partially at least cleaned up pollution, but it doesn't work. And that is one of the biggest issues that we as Indians are learning, that if you have an iniquitous system, it will also be an inherently polluting system. And if you look at water and you look at waste, it becomes so clear. The fact is that cities do not control pollution. Why? Because the cost of building the systems, as I said, is high. If you had to rebuild your entire underground sewerage network today, you cannot. And that's a high-cost effort that we cannot afford. So we build partially. So you build the sewage system for few in the city, but you spend all your money in then building the system, repairing it, the energy costs of pumping that waste from this end to the other end. And so you end up with spending the money to treat the waste of few. But the treated waste of few gets mixed with the untreated waste of the majority. And the end result of it is pollution. So when Indians are becoming today a generation of lost rivers, we are the most, I keep saying this in India, it cannot be more pathetic when you lose a river. You can lose anything else, but the fact that you lose a river. So Mumbai has lost its Mithi River and has become a drain. Delhi has lost its Sahibi River, which has become a drain. Ludhiana has lost a river. And the question, therefore, for us is that we will keep losing rivers if we go through the same system, because it is inherently iniquitous and it is unsustainable. And so what would we do? You would rethink your sewage water system completely. You would recognize the fact that this is a system which is probably built for very rich people who have a lot of money to throw down the drain. But it's not a system made for sensible people who would need to do things to spend carefully and build for everyone, not just for few. So you would reinvent the way you would supply water, and you would simply do that by cutting the cost of your pipeline. You would start investing in your local water systems, in your ponds, in your tanks, in your rooftop harvesting systems. You would capture every drop of that rain when it falls and where it falls. The fact is, if climate change, and as climate change is beginning to have extreme rainfall events, we will get more urban floods, unless we begin to manage that water by holding it. So every sponge of India becomes the modern temple of India. Every lake of India becomes the temple of India. And that's the only way for us to both cope with climate change, but also build a sustainable water supply network. So you can use your lakes for local water supply. You cut the cost of pumping and piping your water. And you do the same thing with sewage. So you cut the costs, you turn your sewage into resource, you treat the drain as an open drain. Why do we need to cover it first, which will never happen? So treat the drain as an open drain. Use microbes, use plants, use every way that modern engineering can teach us so that we could actually turn the sewage into a resource again. Recycle and reuse it. So do it locally so that you can reuse and recycle it. Cut the costs of pumping. And that, to me, can also be done. I'm going to skip my third example, and I'm going to move ahead to this, which is really the way ahead. What do we do? I can see these systems work. I can very much see the fact that we can reinvent. But then we would have to recognize three issues. And those three issues need to become, in some senses, the core of the environmental movement, the core of environmental management for the way ahead. One, you will have to recognize the difference between the environmentalism of the rich and the environmentalism of the poor. And I will explain that. Two, you will need to rethink growth that is affordable and so sustainable. Technologies will have to be rebuilt so that you can actually have technologies which are affordable by large numbers of people. Affordability and equity has to be an integral part of our conversation of sustainability. If it isn't, then I would challenge you, it is not sustainable. And third, you need to find answers. We all need to find answers, technology answers, method answers, policy answers, in really emulating the ways of nature and not trying to do something to change it. So the first thing that I said was the environmentalism of the poor versus the environmentalism of the rich. What do I mean by this? The fact is, when you look at the environmentalism of where it grew, say the US, Europe, it grew after a period of economic growth. So the environmentalists were responding to reducing the adverse impacts of growth. And in some senses, and I say this because it's very much the middle-class environmentalism that I see in India, that I'm part of, that this method of environmentalism is nothing more than garbage managers. Because what you do is that you produce garbage, and then you want to reduce, you want to manage it, but you keep producing more, and you keep looking for new ways in being able to reduce the harmful impacts of garbage. You don't look at how to reduce garbage itself. And that was what I believe is the core of the environmental crisis today. It also depends very much on techno-fixes as solutions, and so looks for small answers and keeps us behind the problem. My example of the car, my example of the sewage system. You don't fix the problem itself. On the other hand, the environmentalism of the rich, of the poor, it accepts that resources and ecological space is limited, and so you need to share with all, and that you can only do this if growth minimizes uses of resources deliberately and drastically, and that this will require us to change in the way we do things, also deliberately and drastically. So it actually accepts the fact. When I see poor communities in India fighting against mining of iron ore or coal, or it's really about the fact that they are fighting for their livelihoods. But then the big question becomes, how will India manage to grow with lesser amount of coal? Can we do more with less? Can we actually reduce the use of our water when there is a fight between agriculture and industry? Can we reduce the use of our water in industry and in cities? Because the imperative is that you will need to share your water with subsistence farmers, with rain-fed farmers, with irrigated farmers, with industry, and with urban areas. So the challenge becomes to be able to minimize the use of resources. And that will require us to think completely out of the box. It actually requires us to think without a box itself. And that really is the challenge of environmentalism in today's world. The second challenge, as I said, is to build new technologies for the future. If you look at the technologies that are available today, they are technologies for the rich when they are rich. And so they are technologies for sustainability which are unaffordable by large numbers of people. And in this, I believe one of the most important ways to look at this, the technologies for the future, is to look at the past as well. To look at the knowledge systems of the very poor, in the systems that we've actually discounted and said that they're not good enough for modern engineering, for modern societies. That we need to look at the rationality of those systems and infuse it with modern science. We need to build a new technology generation which actually can meet the sustainability challenge. And the last point is that you need to learn, we all need to learn, the art and science from nature. You know, it always amazes me. I come from a country where we live on the monsoons. As I said, monsoons is what we breathe, we live, you know, it's everything is about the monsoon. But if you think about it, the monsoon is really about 40,000 billion tons of water, which is carried with such a small temperature change. That's the force of nature. And what we do as humans is to use concentrated sources of energy. Water stored in reservoirs, we concentrate it and then use it. We use oil and coal, which is first stored underground, concentrated, and then use it. So if you were to learn from nature, you would actually maximize the use of weaker sources of energy, which in this case would be solar, rainwater, and you could think of many more. So you would actually think of a whole generation of technologies which would build on this. And so at the end, I would say is that India definitely can reinvent. But it's tough. I will not say that it's going to be easy. We are going to follow your footsteps. We also have the aspirations of first polluting ourselves to death and then trying to clean up. But it can learn if it can learn from its imperatives, if it can deepen democracy, if it has the courage to do things differently. And that, to me, is the biggest challenge that I face, because governments essentially find it very difficult to walk a different path. It's much easier to walk a path that somebody else has already walked. So if somebody else has already built their cities, and first added the cars in it, then built the flyovers in it, and then thought about fitting some public transport in it, that's what we would try and do as well. It's very difficult to think that you could do this completely in a different way. I remember when we were fighting for CNG in India, the only example that was put out to us was that LA at that time had some 800 natural gas buses. And we were told that you are talking about 100,000 vehicles running on gas, and that the largest fleet, I don't even think it was 800, it was, I think, about 80 or something, was the largest fleet in the world was as small as this. So it's not possible. So it takes extraordinary courage to walk a different way. But that's really for societies, for Indian society to determine, for it to push for, and for all of us to support it through knowledge, through information, and to be able to show to say that there is a different way. It will require us to learn from our imperatives. It will require us to deepen democracy because we have to listen to people. We have to listen to them when they say that we want a development that is more inclusive. And as I said, we have to have the courage to be different. But the question for me, and the question that I will leave for you today, is that will the world reinvent? Will the US ever reinvent? And that's a billion, zillion dollar question to which I have no answers. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Sunita, as always, for an extremely thought-provoking talk. I'm sure the audience has many, many questions. I was very moved by your talk, and it made me think of a line from Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, which I've always loved. He writes in this work, "The sewer is the conscience of the city." And I think to some extent your talk does exemplify that.
Absolutely.
In many ways. So I would like to open up the floor to questions now. And it's just my humble request to all of you, since we don't have the whole evening ahead of us, to please keep your questions fairly brief so that our distinguished guests can take as many of them as possible. And Professor Goldman.
Thank you for very stimulating.
I'll moderate the microphone.
Okay, it's coming back. Fine. Can you introduce yourself as well so I can get...
Yeah, I'm... can you hear me now?
Yes.
Professor Goldman from the Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies. Thank you very much for a very thought-provoking and a little disturbing conversation this evening. I have two very brief, as Isha asked, questions about the air quality management in Delhi, particularly. As I understand it, as I recall, the CNG regime really only applies to public vehicles, to buses, to taxis, to autos, whereas this huge increment in privately owned vehicles are largely petrol-driven. So that is one of the things that has there been any thought about extending that regime? The other one, you know, this is the question, since you showed your interesting chart about commuters, has there been any impact on these large-scale, capital-intensive projects like the metro, the Delhi metro? Does that take cars off the road? Because that's, again, an elite mode of travel.
No, very good questions. Let me answer the first. I mean, CNG, actually, we had very carefully directed to public transport and to the paratransit, which is auto rickshaws. And the reason was that, one, they were gross-polluting vehicles, so you needed them to move first. But secondly, CNG is actually a fuel which is not available in such vast quantities. And the price of CNG, we have been fighting to keep lower than the price of diesel. And so our issue has been that if there is limited quantity of clean gas, clean fuel, then we want to direct it to public transport. And our hope was that we would get huge public transport growth, which would reduce the growth of vehicles. Now, that has not happened. And that's a more complicated story. We are fighting very hard to get larger numbers of public transport. But the problem in India has been that whereas CNG was limited to public transport, we've had this terrible problem of having huge growth in diesel vehicles. Because diesel was kept lower than the price of petrol, supposedly in the name of the poor, because it was seen to be fuel used for railways and transport, goods transport, but it's being misused by Mercedes-Benz today, by every rich person who drives on a poor person's fuel. So, and it's very toxic. So we have, you know, they complicated issues where the automobile industry is very powerful. But your second question was about, sorry, I lost that. Delhi Metro. Delhi Metro is great. I mean, every city is going to require, if you're talking about mobility transition at the scale, we are talking about going to require multiple answers. You're going to require very good last mile connectivity. So you need the metro as your spine through the system because it's very expensive. You can't take it across the city, but then you combine it with buses, you combine it with trams, and most importantly, you combine it with the right to walk and the right to bicycle. And that's our big fight that we're having in our cities today. So I'll also keep them brief for the answers.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. That was really nice to hear it. My name's Alex Horn. I'm a professor of ecological engineering, but when I started, we used to call it sanitary engineering. We have a conversation. I thought you made a wonderful point. Professors shouldn't need a microphone in here. I thought you made a wonderful point about the over-treatment of a little sewage mixing with the under-treatment of a lot. And that, of course, is true in most places in the world, and it's something we have to solve. But I'd like to take you back to 1960 when the rivers in the United States used to catch fire. And, we had really bad rivers, dead rivers, in fact, many of them. For about $60 billion spread over about 10 years, we cleaned up the US. And that was mainly due to the magic of activated sludge. Yeah. I think you've got more people, but the costs are less. There's been inflation. I think you might be able to afford to sewer your cities. Not the rest of them, but the cities could be sewered. I've seen it happening in China recently. I think perhaps you could push a little harder that way, but what's the resistance there?
Yeah. It's money. Quite frankly, it's money, it's capacity. You've already built your cities, and you would understand that. Building sewers on built cities is very difficult. Connecting it is very difficult. I am not saying that we should not build underground sewerage. I am simply saying that we will never catch up. So I'm saying think differently, and even if the engineers sell you the pipe dream that they will build all the underground sewerage in your cities, take the open drain and treat it till at least that underground sewerage is done. So I am demanding, and I think that's where we do differ, because I hear this a lot in India saying, it's a matter of time, it's a matter of money, other countries have done it, why can't we do it? We can also have underground sewerage in our cities. My belief is it will never happen. But I'm willing to accept what you're saying. Let Indians find the magic wand, let them build the underground sewerage, but do my way till it's done. Okay? So then we can have a good compromise, because my way will work.
Thank you, Sunita. It's wonderful to see you again. There seems to be a tension between efficient transportation, which requires density, and efficient sewage, which requires less density. And I wonder if you've thought about or designed some models which work these trade-offs so that you can walk short distances and yet manage rainwater and sludge that you don't necessarily want in gigantic apartment blocks.
Well, actually, we're saying both low density. I mean, though in India it's very difficult because we have very high population. So low density is something that you can afford. Okay, we can't. But I think the question really for us will be whatever it is, if it's low density or high density. You need to design it for as much local use, as much local generation as possible, as much as possible try and make sure that your work distance is walkable, is bikeable, as much as possible. Though I would imagine in our cities as they grow and, we will have to find ways of containing the sprawl. Land is becoming now more expensive, and we've got a land acquisition bill that has been passed by the last government, which is going to raise the price of land acquisition to becoming pretty much unaffordable by large numbers of people, which will drive against the sprawl as well, which will drive perhaps for new examples of doing things. So I think the point, unfortunately, is we're not thinking like that yet. And that's where our role becomes, is to push, to say, here's an opportunity. Don't just think of it as a constraint.
Hi, thank you for your talk today. My name is Halima Qureshi, and I am a student here in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. I had a question for you based on what you had talked about, your basic theme of reinvention on a national scale for India and also for the US and other countries to think about. But my question was more on what can India and Pakistan do to work together to promote sustainability in the region, because it's not a secret that they share the same source of surface water. A lot of their rivers come from the same place, and there's been a lot of past conflict over this issue. So what can these two governments specifically do to work together to kind of promote this reinvention on a larger scale?
You know, I'll be very frank with you. I think there's too much talk, there's too much obsession, and it's partly created out of politicians who want to make sure they can divide rather than enjoin on transboundary rivers and transboundary waters. I'm very clear, Pakistan is mucking up its water and its rivers as much as India is. Okay? So what we need to do actually to work together is to build common, is to share experiences, is to learn from each other, to do things in a way that you don't make the mistakes that we are making. Okay? I mean, I went to Lahore recently, and I'm very clear, you're doing exactly what we have done in Delhi. And it's something that we should find ways of being able to work together more and more, to be able to find the answers together. And I think that's where my effort will be, and I think that's where the opportunity for India and Pakistan, or India and Bangladesh, India-Pakistan particularly is. I mean, CNG, for instance, you have massive amounts of gas, and you're completely not thinking through how you will use your gas for large-scale public transportation transition. We are not doing that either. So is there some way that we could work together to do that in a way that both Karachi and Lahore and Islamabad has got cleaner air, but certainly not Lahore and Karachi, we could all find the solution. So I think that's the option. And I want to take you away because I really find this emphasis on transboundary rivers. Listen, I can do nothing about those, nor can you. Those are problems created by a group of people that you and I have very little to do with. So why bother?
Hi, I'm Kate Bloomberg. I am an ERG graduate and work with the International Council on Clean Transportation. We've worked with Namita quite a bit and with CSE. And I just wanted to sort of, I feel like the question of the air quality in transportation is one where I couldn't agree with you more. I bicycle every day. But we also work on the transportation sector and cleaning it up. And I think it's really a question of doing both, that you can't do one and not the other, because we still need buses, we still need transportation sources. And as you said, the heavy duty diesel buses are very expensive. But at the same time, I feel like there's this question of power. I mean, cleaning up diesel is actually, in a lot of ways, it could be just as cheap or cheaper than going to natural gas. But there's an incentive to pollute with all of these diesel cars. And how do you fight back against those big sources of power, the petroleum sector that's got subsidies on diesel, and they say they can't afford to have cleaner diesel, the cars that are polluting, that are very, a Mercedes. Why is a Mercedes allowed to be so much more polluting than other cars? So.
No, I agree. I mean, it is the power, but we did get an SUV tax last year in our budget from a very conservative finance minister who actually said that he was doing it because these cars took too much space and they polluted too much, and that he needed to put a tax on them. Of course, he removed the tax in a year because the election was coming, but that's part of the battle we have. But yes, you have to keep, I think, to my mind, there are two imperatives which will make us change. And I think, we are pushing very hard for new standards. We have now a new roadmap, an auto fuel roadmap coming up. And we are asking for Euro 4 level standards, which is what we have for just 30 cities of India, across India, as of next year. And we've gone to court now asking that. We're also asking for Euro 5 and Euro 6 to be moved in quicker. So we are fighting those battles. But I still believe that if we keep fighting only the quality of fuel and technology, and you don't reinvent mobility, you will still be standing where you are. So you really need more emphasis on reinventing mobility, as much as you need on, in fact, I would say more than what you need even on cleaning up the fuel. And I think the biggest trigger for all that is going to be health and is going to be congestion. So I think if we can effectively use those two tools and push towards reinventing mobility, then it's a much bigger answer than just cleaning up the quality of fuel.
Sunita, Dan Kammen, that was a wonderful talk. I'm delighted to see the solutions, but I wonder about something that we all grapple with, and that is that by and large, all hopeful talks right now on this topic very conspicuously avoid carbon. Carbon's embedded in all of these solutions, but the movement at the UN level, at the places where we're really getting things done, describe them rightly so in terms of the local benefits, the opportunities for change. But the physicist that lurks in many people who pass through this program always worry about if one of the key problems is item X, don't just try to solve it by coming around to the side. And one of the big concerns is that the international discussions have gone effectively nowhere over 20 plus years. So one of the questions is either how does one scale up much more rapidly than they're doing from these individual solutions, or how does one make at least one of the currencies of these local solutions that which is being left out because we're making so little progress on carbon and climate?
No, you're right, Dan. I mean, I'm very clear. The solutions I'm talking about are going to fix India's problems, okay? And if they fix India's problem, and if we get there, maybe they'll fix a small amount of the world's problem. But they're not going to get anywhere till we actually reinvent what we do across the world, and we fix the dialogue that is happening on climate change. But, it does amaze me that in the US, I see so much talk about coal and so little talk about methane from fracking. So I can't also understand how in the US, where, this dialogue is moving on, yes, we are talking about carbon, and yes, we are talking about reducing the carbon intensity of the US by moving towards gas. Yes, it's cleaner as far as carbon dioxide is concerned, but yes, and I think we need to underline that you know nothing about what the methane emissions from gas are today.
That's because the methane is profitable and the coal is seen as not profitable.
It's a gas versus coal issue, okay? So I think, yes, the climate debate is a very difficult debate. You know this, I know this. There are many in the room who we work together on it. It's a debate which, I cannot understand why grown-up men spend so much time on commas and full stops and standing where they are without moving an inch. But it's something that we have to fight for. We do need a global agreement on climate change. There is no doubt in my mind. And that agreement, Dan, will be really designed along the lines I talked about. It's the Delhi roads, okay? So, I mean, how can you think of a climate agreement which doesn't have equity at the core of it? How can you think of a climate agreement which doesn't look at how the rich will reduce so the poor can grow? How does President Obama become the evangelist for clean coal and talk about not exporting coal to our part of the world when he doesn't reduce emissions drastically at home? I think these are hard questions that, we all ask. And the fact is that in my view, the answers will come out of reinventing, perhaps if we can do things in India. I do not see this as a model that will change the world. But if I can get clean air in India, I would be very happy.
First, thank you very much. Lawrence Cohn in Anthropology. So two quick questions. The one very quick, which is just I'm curious, to what extent does the Gujarat model, so-called, in its relation to growth at stake in this election, or partially, at stake in this election matter for the kinds of work you do and the kinds of reinventions? And then I'm particularly interested in the reinvention of mobility as you frame it. So I'm wondering, in relation to the forms of local expertise and social movements you're raising, is there, for example, given the right to cycle as a movement, are there right to cycle movements emerging? And more broadly, what kinds of, where do you look for reinventing mobility?
Very good questions. Yeah, very tough questions. Well, as far as the Gujarat model is concerned, it's a mystery, you know. And we'll know this in a week's, in a month's time. And what happens beyond. Nobody quite knows. I mean, if you look at it, the Gujarat model does include the only BRT system that works in the country, okay? So it's the only bus rapid transit system, and it's built really beautifully in Ahmedabad. It doesn't still have the right to walk, it doesn't have the right to bicycle, but it does have very nice buses, and it does provide a really efficient BRT, which Delhi couldn't do. So I don't quite know what the Gujarat model is, other than being very corporate-driven. But then this government, and all governments are corporate-driven. So what's the scale of the difference? We will only wait to see as and when democracy plays out. And I mean, I'll be very clear with you. I'm a very strong believer in democracy, and I will take whoever comes, even if it's the devil. Okay. I, of course, am a little pissed. I'm a little annoyed that I didn't get to vote because today is voting day. And I had to make the choice of Berkeley or voting. So if we have a bad prime minister, you blame it on me and yourself for not allowing me to go and vote, okay? But the reinvention of mobility and the bicycle lanes, you know, it's the most frustrating thing in the world is to see that the class differences that actually determine the way policies are done. At the end of the day, the bicycle, it isn't as if people in Delhi don't bicycle. We don't need a bicycling club in Delhi. Okay? 20% of Delhi bicycles, they're just invisible. They bicycle because they're poor. They're not seen by anyone. A large number of people walk. Government's own data. Government just did a study where they actually did city by city by city. They did a study of modal share of transport, and they found that the bulk of cities, people walked and bicycled and then took the bus, the figures that I showed you. So it isn't as if people don't cycle. And my annoyance with cycling is the fact that, you know, it shouldn't become that first you cram the roads with cars. And now, I mean, when I came, I'm sorry, it's a really short trip, but I am, you know, for me, as I said, sewage and all these are things that I'm constantly looking at. So I was constantly looking for bicycle lanes across. You have beautiful pavements. I'd love to take them home. But no bicycle lanes, not even worth talking about. Now, you filled up your roads with cars, and now you will, like New York, try and fit in bicycles into it. We've already got bicyclists. And the question is, why can't we just plan for them and plan for the cars later? So we did get, the High Court of Delhi has passed a very interesting order. They've asked government to plan road space based on equity of use. Now just imagine if there was an international court which would say the same thing for climate change, okay? So they've said plan it for equity of use, which means that anybody who uses the road more gets more space of it, okay? So that's an order. Now, obviously for us, the challenge is to get it implemented. And getting it implemented, as I said, it's really about a mindset which has not done it differently. And that's very big. Don't take that lightly. It's not even evil. It's not about fossil fuel and the evil interests behind it. It's just a mindset which is comfortable in doing it in a particular way. And not having the courage and the imagination to think of it at the scale that is needed. So we are still doing it in small little bits. So we do have a particular road which is turned off on a Sunday for bicycles only, or a particular street, but those don't add up at the scale of what we need. And so I think, to me, that's the big challenge, is to change the way people think, get people to understand the crisis, the imperative, and the possibility.
Hi, Sunita. My name is Barnali. I'm a landscape architect who works on green infrastructure. I'd like to join the SHIT Club with you, Anisha. And I also work on public transit, walking, and biking advocacy. So you spoke about two of my very favorite subjects. But what I'm curious about is this question you left us with about will the US learn? And you started talking about it for one of the earlier questions, but I want to hear a little more about what the dynamic is of change when you take India and US. How do we influence each other, both at the upper levels, government levels, but also at the people-to-people level? Because I've lived here now 15 years, and I want to figure out what I can do here locally that not only improves my life here, but then how does it also impact what's happening back at home?
Good question.
And one more, which is, in India, what do you see as the barriers to this change happening? Not the usual ones of corruption or things like that, but specific to environmental issues.
Let me take your second question first. Barriers, I see, as I said, the mindset, not doing it differently, not having role models. I mean, there isn't a city in the world that we can all point to and say, see, they've done it right. And it always gives confidence to planners, and you're one of them. It always gives confidence to planners to know somebody else has actually done it that way. The only city that we hold up as a role model is Singapore. Okay? But Singapore has a very different governance system, and it's always thrown back on my face. So would you prefer to have a Singapore-type governance system as well? And then I said, no. We want transportation like them, but not governance like them. So it's, I think, one is the barrier, the mental, the inability to do it differently. The second is the unaffordability of the technology that exists. Now, that's also, as I said, an opportunity, because if that technology is too expensive for large numbers of people, can you reinvent the technology itself so to make it cheaper? But again, it's how do you do that? If you know any, in the sewage business, we're all trying to bring in decentralized, microbe-based, natural technologies for use. But, there's such a huge issue about will they work, will they not work? We don't have the right tendering systems. We don't have the right standards for those technologies. So I think it's a matter of time, and I think that's where all of you come in. That's where you come in, because I think a lot of the work that we need to do is to fix these. But if we want to fix them, we should move beyond what is easy. We have to keep pushing the envelope. We, at least all of us in this room, cannot accept that the envelope is enough and that we just need to lick it a little better. We need to be able to push the envelope, and all of us have to play that role to keep challenging the current system, the technologies that exist. I mean, one big question that I didn't raise here, but, why should we do solar in India when we have such a big energy access issue? Should we be thinking about solar for the poor? Should we be thinking of solar for renewables? Because if you think about solar for renewables, you get grid-based solar, you get the same fossil fuel companies today becoming green and clean and producing solar energy, feeding into the grid, which actually reaches very few people. So can we challenge that system? Then in your case, one of the things that we are finding ourselves very unpopular about is that we have been challenging the green building norms in India. Because the green building norms are basically built in a way that you first build a bad building and then you green it. You build a building with glass and then you just put very insulated glass and very efficient air conditioners and get a LEED rating for it. And there's a whole business of certifiers, and I'm sorry, but your own community of architects and everyone else who is merely part of the game. So, how do you reinvent green building standards to make them more affordable? The fact is, if a green building is too expensive, don't give it to me. I don't want it. It doesn't work for me. So I think those are the issues that, I think we can all work on together to keep challenging, pushing the envelope, asking for more, demanding more.
Hi, thanks for a very thought-provoking talk. I'm Amol Farke. I'm a graduate, and I work at the International Energy Studies Group at Lawrence Berkeley Labs. So my question was that what you're talking about a big imperative and a large national scale transformation. That's what's at hand or at stake. How much of this has become a political conversation in a sense
Good
that
question.
there's a election season?
Very good
Has it
question.
become part of anybody's election agenda? Because the example you gave about Delhi is an example of judicial activism, that Supreme Court, but it is up to the legislators to really, if you want to talk about. So that was my question.
Very good question. Very good question. And quite frankly, it's yes and no. I mean, this election, please don't even see it as a series. There's no issues in this election, okay? This is the most issue-less election that we've had in a very long time. But yes, air pollution has been on the Delhi local election agenda. I mean, Sheila Dikshit came to power on pollution. She stood for next term fighting that she had cleaned up Delhi's air because of CNG. She has made metro has been part of the pollution issue. Water is a top pollution issue. Even in an issue-less election like today, water is a key issue in urban India. The problem is politicians only think of providing clean, free water and free power as the answers, which then becomes another part of the problem, because it's when you provide free water, you're actually subsidizing the rich and not the poor, because the poor don't get water in any case. So, I mean, those are big issues for us to be able to raise. But yes, you're very right. And my answer would be, yes, locally, pollution is now an issue. Water is an issue. Crop losses are an issue because of variable weather. Whether those are linked to climate change or not is a different issue. But the fact is they are an issue. And that's why local issues are playing out and will play out. But what will the answers be, and what will be the answers that are most easy for political parties to provide, is where the problem is. Because politicians will then go for either clean power. I mean, one of our biggest challenges is to get parking rates increased in our cities. Now, middle class growing, it's very difficult for politicians to agree to raise parking rates, even though, as I said, only 10 to 15% of Delhi drives, and most other cities is even lower. So I think those are the big challenges that we're going to face. I mean, what I said, and I think Dan is very right, it's a sort of agenda of hope. But it's an agenda of challenge, and it's also an agenda where we are fighting. I mean, we're going to try and keep making sure that these things happen. But it's not going to be easy. There's no question in my mind.
I'm going to take only 3 more questions. Please pardon me, but I have to...
I've also been long.
Eventually to an end, okay? And more than 3 hands are up, so please don't raise your hands anymore. It's very awkward for me, but I have to...
Isha, otherwise I can take quick notes of questions and quickly reply to them if you don't, because if people have really burning... I can do that.
In that case, if you are willing to be here a tiny bit longer, we will take a few more than 3 short questions. And Sunita, take quick notes. And you will answer also. Yeah, that's very good. Quick. Okay. All right, in that case, thank you. Do you want me to cluster the questions?
No, you can just take them. I'll just write them and I'll cluster them.
Sunita ji, I'm Ravi from Public Policy School. I'm a graduate student here. My question to you is, and you touched on this issue a little bit, but I wanted to push you further on this. The growth model and the alternative development model which you talked about will require change in mindsets as well as change in what we consider as our status symbols and aspirations. So do we have a plan set for taking those things into account given the short timeline which we have?
Good, very good question.
Right next to it. Right next to it.
Hi, thank you. Eric Thompson with Natel Energy, and we're a Bay Area-based company that's commercializing a hydroelectric technology that's for low head, high flow, no dams, and we're getting a lot of inquiries from India about this, and I was hoping you could say something that would help us respond to those developers in a way that's commercially relevant, but also in a more sustainable assistance for their hydro development efforts.
Just very quick, so what is your technology?
It's for basically river or irrigation drops that are already in place, dams that are already in place, especially in irrigation systems that are under 6 meters and so on. And it enables large-scale, utility-scale development of energy, but at many distributed locations at those kinds of drops.
No, I can more.
We're just going to take 4 or 5 quick questions and then have our guest try to address as many of them as possible. Hands are going up faster now that these which is extremely uncomfortable.
I'm going to just walk off the page on this one because you've been recurring themes here, and of course, one of the themes that hasn't popped up is using these ideas of courage and breaking the mindset and reinvention and getting your insights, because this is a global problem, not just India's, of using this to come up with, and this is where I would like your insights, a way to socially reinvent, culturally reinvent a humane negative growth for our populations.
Namaste, Sunita. Raphael Friedman, I'm an ERG graduate from way, way back. Some of you are still here. I work in energy efficiency. I work in a bunch of countries in Latin America. I see the same issues you say. Question is similar to something somebody mentioned before. You talk about democracy. How do we get the masses you talked about that are disenfranchised, don't get the equity they deserve, to look at a different model for their own development instead of trying to emulate this horrible model we're exporting like crazy?
Yes, Zelia Willer-Heit from the University of Oslo, me, Sunita. My question is about learning, thinking, rethinking. So how do the schools could contribute in those issues? I mean, what do India, how do they reach those issues when it comes to curriculum, and how do they address those problems? Thank you.
Just pass the mic down, please. Just down your own row. Thank you. This gentleman has been waiting for a long time patiently.
Thank you. Thank you, Sunita. Yes, my question just boils down to, I feel that beyond technological change, what we need in the world is a spiritual transformation. And I feel that, your last question was, will the U.S. learn? And who would the teacher be? And I really believe that teacher could be India. If it goes back to its roots, its spiritual roots, and takes that leadership and changes the way, I've over the last 20 years been going back and forth to India many times, and so many things amaze me, and then there are things that very much disturb me. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Should I take those? Should I take them now? So I think, I think very...
Straight up them now,
yeah.
and then we'll kind of see where people are.
No, I think I can combine a lot of the questions as well. I think the big question that all of you are really asking me is, how is this going to happen? I mean, how will you change the status symbols? How will you use democracy better? And to me, it's really about first learning that there is a different way, and challenging the status symbols. You will have to work democracy. You will have to find a way to give the voice to the very poor. I mean, as I said, most of Delhi walks. So why wouldn't we build our roads for the people who walk a bicycle? We don't, because we may be a democracy. We may be a social, a country which talks about social goods. But when it comes to urbanization, we think this is the growth model that we need to follow. So I think in some senses it's going to mean for us to keep pushing, to show where the crisis is, to show where the options are, and to use schools, as you said, to be able to contribute to it. But my only fear is, and I want to leave it at that, is my only fear is that unless we can challenge the very idea of what environmentalism means, we will still keep teaching and imparting knowledge about environmentalism, which is going to mean that you keep fixing what is broken, but you don't really fix it. And I think that's, to me, the big issue that will come out of India. So, I will talk to you about your technology over drinks. Okay.
Before I say a final thank you to you, our fantastic audience, and to our even more fantastic speaker, I would like to acknowledge the untiring and generous work of the staff members of CSAS as well as ERG. Manali and Punita are both here today. And from ERG, Sandra Diwali and Kay Burns, without which nothing is possible. And finally, thanks to you for being a fantastic audience. And once more, thank you very much to Sunita, sacrificing her right and privilege to vote for the very first time in her adult life, she told me, okay, to come to be with us at Berkeley and share her insights on growth, pollution, sustainability, and ultimately equity and poverty.